Welcome to Delphic Memories. This episode involves a family that I know very well and their encounters with an entity that they call the Boogey Man. The events take place over a span of about 18 years, and the encounters began in a small house in the countryside of Arkansas. The couple had two small daughters at the time. The oldest was between 2 and 3 years old. We will call her Amy. The youngest at this time was a baby, around a year to a year and a half old, and we will call her Denise. Amy, the oldest, began refusing to sleep in her bed at night. She would cry and fuss and point at her closet and say, "Boogey Man, Boogey Man." She was terrified of something in her closet. Her parents thought initially it was nothing more than a child's imagination getting the best of her. A few years later, the family moved to Oklahoma near the Texas border. Again, they lived in the countryside in a 3-bedroom house. By this time, the family had 3 little girls. Amy was given the room in the back of the house. Denise shared a room with her younger sister, Sarah, near the parents' room in the front of the house. Amy initially slept all alone in her room, but again, she became scared and refused to sleep in her room at night. She said the boogeyman was back, and he was in her room. The room ended up being more of a storage for toys and winter clothes, and none of the children would play or sleep in it. One morning, the mother went to the bedroom to get something, and she saw that the room looked as if someone had ripped open the bags of clothes and thrown them about and tossed the toys all over the room. The girls swore that they didn't do it, and Amy insisted it was the boogeyman that did it. One night, the girls were sleeping all in the same bed in the front bedroom near their parents' room. Something woke Denise up. It was the sound of whispering. She saw in the darkness a tall and black massive figure. It was at least 7 feet tall and as wide as a football player wearing pads. The black shadow man was making mumbling noises and growling as he looked down with his red, piercing eyes at her sister, Amy. She pulled the sheets over her head and was frozen in terror. When she pulled the sheets down to look again, the shadow man was gone. Denise saw the shadow man almost every night after this. She would hear him stomp from the back bedroom, through the kitchen, through the dining room, into the living room, and it would stand in her doorway and just stare at her sister Amy. The family had enough of being frightened and decided to move to the other side of the state. The last night they were in this home, I was there, along with other people who had come to help with the move. We were all sitting in the living room talking about the upcoming trip and what roads we would be taking along the way. I had been told about the odd occurrences in the back room, but I knew nothing of the boogeyman. All of a sudden, we heard loud banging coming from that back bedroom. Everyone immediately fell silent, and we looked at each other in surprise. Then we heard slow, heavy footsteps start from the back room into the kitchen and then right into the dining room, and midway they just stopped. You could feel the presence of evil, and it was strong. We waited in silence, and we were all just too shocked to move or say anything. We couldn't actually see anything, but you felt it. You could feel it just staring at you. Then suddenly the mother was pushed down on the fold-out bed, and she began screaming, "Get it off me! Get it off me!" We all began praying and rebuking the evil, and the father called up his grandmother, who was 90 at the time, and asked her to pray too. As quickly as it came, it went away. Everyone was terrified and barely slept any that night. I remember we ended up leaving before the sun even came up because it seemed pointless trying to get any sleep. When the family moved into their new home in eastern Oklahoma, they were grateful to have no experiences. They felt safe again, but unfortunately that soon changed when they moved into a new trailer house in the same area but out in the country. The 3 girls had become accustomed to sleeping together and were still doing so in this house. Amy refused to sleep on the edge of the bed near the closet every night. This particular night, the 2 younger girls had already fallen asleep near the wall, so the edge of the bed was the only place for Amy to sleep. Denise awoke to the sound of the familiar heavy steps that she had heard before. This time they were coming from the closet. She looked up to see the tall shadow man standing over her bed. She could see that he had long claws on the end of his fingers. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and he looked right at her and then back to her sister Amy. He then leaned down and began to whisper something, but loudly whisper right into Amy's ear, but she never woke up. It was the same combination of mumbling and growling that she had heard him do before. After that night, the family began to experience paranormal events again. Door slamming, lights going off and on, footsteps in the evening. Eventually, the entire family ended up sleeping in the same room. The children were just too terrified to sleep on their own. So far, only the two older girls had actually seen the boogeyman. The parents had not, and the younger sibling had not. One night, the mother woke up to the feeling of her hair being touched. She thought it was her husband. When she rolled over to ask him what he was doing, she saw her husband was asleep, and the shadow man was hovering over him. Most of the outline seemed to be a large dark mist, but the face was more in focus, and she said that she saw long, sharp teeth, and she was just frozen in fear. And she closed her eyes and began to pray. When she opened her eyes, the shadow man was gone. The family decided to move again to a new home. They had been settled in the trailer house on their family's land for a few weeks now, and things again were quiet, and there was no paranormal activity that had occurred. Again, the family was terrified by a surprising event. They were all in the living room watching TV and relaxing before bed. The front door wouldn't stay closed on its own very well, so until they could repair it, they had kind of attached a string to the knob and it was tied to a nail. Suddenly, the door plopped open just a little bit, but it was stopped by the string that was tied to the nail. A long black arm reached over from the other side of the door, starting at the very top and going all the way down to the bottom of the floor. The father grabbed his gun just out of instinct, and the whole family began to pray again. The boogeyman was not seen again for almost 10 years. The family had moved back to southwest Oklahoma, and the older girls had graduated high school, and Amy was living with her husband and her 2 kids. The mother and father were running the local paper route, so they would be driving through town, up and down the streets, often before the sun came up. One particular early morning, around 4 a.m., they were delivering papers and happened to be on the same road that Amy had lived on. They saw a very tall shadow man with red eyes sitting in a chair on the front porch. He stood up and looked right at them, and as they sped off, they said they could see him just standing there in the rearview mirror, just watching and perhaps waiting for them to return. Thank you so much for listening to Delphic Memories. Again, check back every week for new episodes, and I appreciate you listening.